Before we begin, I just want to reiterate uh, that while we're here on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which each of us call home. Do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures, and find ways in our work and in our lives to reflect our own commitments to change. Now, without further ado, I'll do a brief introduction of our next speaker. Mr. Naheed Nenshi was the 36th mayor of Calgary. He was the first Muslim mayor of this large North American city. He served 3 terms in Calgary and was also the mayor of Calgary at the time of the 2013 floods. He is an accomplished business professional and a community leader with a solid track record of getting things done. He holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree from University of Calgary and a Master's of Public Policy from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. In 2002, this is a point, he wrote about how cities can retain their professionals and use resources effectively in a publication entitled Building Up, Making Canada's Cities Engines of Growth and Magnets of Development. He also co-founded 2 citizen groups aimed at improving Calgary's civic government. And in 2009, he was invited to become a founding member of Civic Camp, an active citizenship forum that encourages and enables Calgarians to actively engage and collaborate ideas in civic affairs. Now, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, without further ado, Mr. Nenshi. Mr. Nenshi, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks so much, Bettina. Merci tout le monde, and welcome to this conversation on this wonderful conference on ethics and communication, neither of which I'm really going to talk about. But really, what we're going to do in the next little while is spend some time talking about the state of the world, just a small little tiny thing, and what our own responsibility is at this point in history to be able to build a better community together. So thank you so much for taking the time. I will say that if you're comfortable and want to be on camera, feel free to be on camera so I know if anyone's laughing at my jokes. So thank you, Bettina, for sticking around. And we will proceed. So let me begin by saying I join you today from a place where there have always been people. The Blackfoot people call this place Mokinstis, the elbow, the place where 2 rivers come together. And the reason that people exist on this land is because of those 2 rivers. Despite the fact that we got some snow last night and the night before, this is actually a pretty arid region. It doesn't rain or snow very much here. So people came to this spot because of the water, because ultimately the water brought life. So for thousands of years, people have been coming to this spot to hunt and to fish and to trade, to dream and to dance, to fight sometimes. Sounds like a city council meeting minus the dream, dance, lives and loves parts, but ultimately to engage in that very human act of building community. So I love that we do everything starting with a land acknowledgement now, but I'm also very aware that it's very easy for that acknowledgement to become sort of a dusty conversation about the past or something we do by rote, saying grace before a meal, when really what it needs to be is a reminder of who we are and of who we intend to be. So it's not just a statement about the past, it's a statement about the future and about the present. It's a statement about who we are, and it's a statement about who we need to be together. And so I hope that that is how we will take that as we think going forward. And I'm really happy to be able to start in that spot, because we are going to talk a little bit in the next little while about where we go from here. in terms of building that community that works for everyone. So to start in a good way, I will say to you, Amba Wastich, Dada Nastada, Tansi, Buju, Oki Nitsugwa, Nitsuwano Gabesto Tispistis. And so what I did there was I very badly mispronounced the indigenous languages of this area. But the sentiment is the same, and it's a sentiment that is very common in indigenous greetings. Greetings to all my relations. And I love that because it reminds us that we live in a tapestry, that each of us is a thread in that tapestry that is wound into what we call community. And so in my case, that community starts with an understanding of Nitsitapi. It just means the people. We call them the people of the Blackfoot Confederacy now, the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piikani First Nations. Here we have the mountain people, the Ahi-Nakota people, of the Chiniki, the Wesley, and the Bearspaw First Nations. Immediately adjacent to the city of Calgary, the Beaver people, whom we call the Tsuut'ina people. We're also home to Métis people with their deep connection to our history and to our land. And for the last 150 years or so, we have welcomed people from every corner of this broken earth. And we've said to everyone, you are welcome here. You will be safe here. You will be able to live a life of dignity here, a life of prosperity here, a life of opportunity here for yourself and for generations to come. So to me, that's the very simple promise of our community. Do we always get it right? No. Do we make lots of mistakes? Absolutely. But should we be continuing in a spirit of being able to work together to build that community for everyone? I think so. And I think that the challenge that we face is that as we live in the world today, we're starting to see fracturing. We're starting to see tribalism. We're starting to see division and mean-spiritedness. I'll come back to those themes. But ultimately, we have a job to do to make sure that we're fulfilling that very simple promise of our community. So to my Tsuut'ina brothers and sisters, I am known as Etia. That means always ready. And as any organizers of any event that need me to speak at know, that does not mean always on time. But also to my Nitsitapi, to my Siksika Blackfoot brothers and sisters, you see now, here's an interesting thing about the culture of what we used to call Plains Indians, particularly of the Siksika. They have a great sense of humor, and they love nothing more than taking the air out of the high and mighty. So in typical Siksika fashion, they've given me a name I cannot pronounce. It's something like Besto Tispischus. It means clan leader, he who moves camp, and the others follow. Now, I should tell you that one of the greatest moments of my life was after I was done being mayor. I was still the mayor, because between the election and the new mayor coming in, exactly 1 week, and it's a very busy week where you end up doing a lot of transition work and so on. You got to move out of your office, the new person's got to move in, all that stuff. But I had a meeting scheduled in my calendar, and it was sort of a mysterious meeting. It said, be in this room, wear this, wear an indigenous outfit, wear your moccasins. But I didn't really know what was happening. And when I got to I see someone is correctly spelling my Blackfoot name. If you can tell me how to pronounce it, you can be one of a long list of people who've tried to tell me how to pronounce it, and I still can't get it right. But in any case, I went into the room and I found elders representing all of the nations of Treaty 7. And that was a very special day for me, because that was the day that I was being gifted a headdress, or what they call a war bonnet, big eagle feather thing. And it was very, very special to me, but it was special to me for 2 reasons in particular. The first reason was that the Siksika elder who was in charge of the ceremony also could not pronounce my name. So I thought, okay, good. It's not just me. And he said, you have a Kainai name. Those names are hard to pronounce. So I felt good about that. The second reason, of course, that it was so important for me is now that I have a headdress, I can go to any musical festival. So Coachella, here I come. Now I can't see all of you, but you're kind of wondering if you're allowed to laugh at that. That joke killed with the elders, let me tell you. What was more important, though, was that I asked, this is a lovely thing. I'm going to find a display for it or something, put it up on a shelf. And one of the elders who was there, Reg Croshu, who I call my Uncle Reg, said to me, well, you need to wear it. You need to physically wear it, which I have to admit I haven't had the guts to do. But you also need to emotionally and mentally wear it. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, in our tradition, we call it a war bonnet because we give it to people who we consider to be warriors. And I said, I'm not much of a warrior. And he said, well, no, you have to understand this. Now that you have this, you are called upon to be a warrior for justice, a warrior for reconciliation. One of the other elders, Casey Eagle speaker, suggests we shouldn't use reconciliation, but we should use reconciliation, which I really like. But you have to be a warrior for what's right. And I thought about that a lot. And I thought about the fact that, you don't need a headdress to do that, that every one of us is called upon to be a warrior in creating the future that we need to create. By the way, I should have mentioned up top that hopefully I will not be too long-winded today. There's a first for everything, but we will have some time to answer some questions as we go forward. So please feel free to use the chat function. Think about your questions, your responses. Think of this as a Reddit Ask Me Anything. It doesn't have to be about what I'm talking about, but I'm happy to address any thoughts or questions you have in this rare opportunity we have to be all together. So, since I finished my job as mayor about 14 or 15 months ago, I'm shocked it's been that long. I haven't done a thing. I left office with 3 things on my phone, a list of TV shows and movies I should catch up on for the last decade, something called Game of Thrones, a list of books I should read, and a list of little repairs to do around my house, which I've been neglecting. I have done none of those things. I spend my days thinking and, well, doom scrolling on my phone and getting caught up on TikTok dance crazes. But I have been spending some time thinking about just a tiny thing, which I call the state of the world. And I want to share with you my hypotheses, my hypothesis, I should say, about where we find ourselves today and test that with you. I believe that today we are facing 5 simultaneous crises, big ones, every one of which could take down a lesser civilization. And we're hitting 5 of them at once. And I want to very briefly discuss those 5 things. The first, of course, is the public health crisis with the pandemic. By the way, the pandemic is nowhere near over. Somehow we have decided that we, like in that wonderful Disney movie Encanto, which I did watch, we don't talk about COVID. No, 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 no. But it's still going on. More people died of COVID in 2022 than died of COVID in 2021. Last week in Alberta, we had 25 deaths, which matches one of the biggest death weeks since the beginning of the pandemic. And yet, we somehow have decided together that we're just not going to talk about it anymore, that we have accepted some level of societal risk, that we don't want to risk being divisive by talking about the simple things that we need to do to protect ourselves, to protect people in our community, elderly people, people with disabilities, but really everyone in our community. I've never understood how we got there. But regardless, one of the things the pandemic has taught us is that even though we as Canadians have a tendency of being very smug, we have a tendency of thinking, well, we've got universal free healthcare and everyone's treated the same and we're very well equipped to handle this sort of thing. Well, what we learned, to use the old cliche, is we may be all in the same storm, but we're certainly not in the same boat. So many of us are in super yachts. Most of us, thankfully, are in boats that are sturdy and that will keep us dry and safe and warm. Some of us are in rowboats. Some of us are in the water. And as we think about our healthcare system, which I will argue didn't come to the brink of collapse, but on occasions during this pandemic have actually collapsed. We just haven't admitted that to ourselves. We have to think hard about how to be able to be smarter about this, to ensure that we handle public health crises in a way that is equitable, but in a way that actually puts saving people's lives and looking after the vulnerable at the front of the list. And we're just not doing it at the moment. So that's the first one. Second crisis, so public health. Second crisis, mental health and addiction. I'm not just talking about opioid overdose or opioid poisoning. I've been told I should change from overdose to poisoning because there's no dose that is safe of a lot of these things. But we're not just talking about that. We are talking about that because, of course, I haven't looked at the stats very recently, but through about the middle of 2022, we lost more people during the pandemic to drug poisoning than we actually lost to COVID. But in addition to that, 1 in 4 of us will be formally diagnosed with mental illness at some point in our lives. 4 out of 4 of us, every one of us, will struggle with our mental health from time to time. If you're a politician, usually you're struggling with your mental health about the 5th hour of the city council meeting. But in reality, mental health and addiction are something that influences almost everything in our community, and we almost never talk about it. So long before the pandemic began, I had decided that I would make the focus of my 3rd term as mayor the creation of Canada's first community-based action plan on mental health and addiction. That plan has 3 parts to it. Number 1, being well. Some people might call that prevention, but it's broader than that. It's about being well in all aspects of your life, being well at school, being well in your workplace, being well in your faith community, being well in your community organizations. And so it's really about creating, if I can use those dirty words, safe spaces where people can talk about their mental wellness and where we can take interventions to try and improve people's mental health. Last week on Valentine's Day, I found myself in an elementary school talking to the kids. It was adorable. School assembly, kindergarten kids at the front, grade 6 kids at the back, ascending heights. And the kindergarten kids were awesome. One little kid, I think a grade 1 kid, stood up and said, "Do you know what the world needs now?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Kindness." And he sat down. And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he said, "We just got to be nice to one another." And he sat down again. And then at some point I was picking on the grade 6s in the room because in Alberta, grade 6 is when you study government. So I thought they would have questions about being the mayor and the municipal order of government and so on. And they only really wanted to talk about mental health. And one kid stood up, like an 11-year-old boy who, shall we say, looked like a typical hockey playing 11-year-old boy. And I wasn't sure what he was going to say. And what he said was, I have a friend. All they wanted to talk about was mental health, the grade 6s. They really wanted to talk about how they were trying to create their school into a mentally well place. And this one boy stood up and he said, I have a friend who's struggling with mental illness. Those are the words he used. And I said, okay. And he goes, I don't really know how to help him. I'm just a kid. But I know what I can do. And what I can do is be his friend. And I can remind him that I'm his friend. And I can remind him that I'm there for him even when he's having a really bad day. And so I thought to myself, okay, that first bit, being well, even the kids really get it. And so how do we ensure that we grown-ups are also really understanding this? The second piece is getting help where, when, and how you need it. And yes, we differ on these things. And certainly the government of Alberta, which actually is doing extraordinary work in the field of addiction, is overly politicizing the issue, fighting with the province of British Columbia about the right mechanisms of how to help people. And it's all kind of counterfactual, and I don't want to get into it unless you have questions about it. But the critical thing is that the help has to be there at the moment you're looking for it. So if someone who's struggling with addiction decides that today is the day they're going to get better, You can't say to them, come back in 4 or 5 weeks for a treatment bed. We might have one then. And in Alberta, I don't always praise governments, but the government of Alberta actually had instituted a system where, for the first time in our history, if you showed up and said, I need a treatment bed, there was more than likely a treatment bed available for you, a fully funded treatment bed available for you at that moment. So these are the kinds of things that are possible for us to be able to do. And we have to be able to ensure the help and the services and supports are there when you need them. And it's much cheaper to provide the services than to let people live with the scourge of mental illness for a long time and all its attendant consequences. The final one is staying safe. And staying safe is about certainly the person suffering with mental illness being safe in their community. It's about policing. It's about how we think differently about how we approach people in mental health crisis. And it's also about the community feeling safe. If there was one thing that people are worried about right now, it's the increased levels of social disorder that we've seen since the pandemic. People are feeling unsafe. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If people feel unsafe, they don't go on the train, they don't go downtown, it becomes an unsafer space. And so we have to figure out how to make sure people feel safe and comfortable in their communities, regardless of where they find themselves in life. So I wanted to spend a little more time on that one, just because I really wanted folks to understand that it is possible to make a lot of change and a lot of difference, starting with kids, moving right through to seniors. There are life stages and phases where mental illness is more prevalent. And these are things that we have to be able to address and we have to be able to think strongly about. And if you're interested, ask me a question and I can go into some more detail on some what we're learning about the brain science and trauma and adverse childhood events and the kinds of things that we have to work on throughout people's lives, but particularly with young people. So that's the second one. So public health, mental health, and addiction. Number 3, economic justice. It's unfashionable to talk about this, but the rates of income inequity in our society have never been higher. I used to say they'd never been higher than since the Gilded Age, but in fact, they've never been higher, period. And during the pandemic, a new billionaire was crafted every single day. There aren't all that many billionaires in the world, but we created a new billionaire every single day during the pandemic. Meanwhile, we all know how much the affordability crisis is hitting us, how difficult it is for people to get by, and that gulf is growing ever wider. In fact, just last week, I heard that the Edmonton Food Bank is now reducing the size of their hampers because they can't afford the food. So we're really starting to see a world where the wealthy are doing fine. And look, for many of us on this call, we like to complain about the price of groceries. We like to complain about our utilities bill, but it's a horrible inconvenience. But it's not forcing us to make life and death decisions about ourselves and our families. But there are too many people in our community who are facing exactly that situation. During the pandemic, we have been introduced, too many of us for the first time, to a group of our neighbors. Now, these neighbors get up very early in the morning and they take the bus to work. The work is at a long-term care center. And at that long-term care center, they wake up our parents and our grandparents, change their diapers, get them ready for breakfast, and work with them through the morning. It's hard work. It's physically demanding work. It's manual labor. And they do that work until after lunch. And then after lunch, they have to leave. And the reason they have to leave is because the system is set up such that the private operator of the day home can only afford to make the investor of the long-term care home, can only afford to make investments in their home by not giving full-time hours and not paying benefits. So our neighbors get on another bus and go to their other job, might be at Tim Hortons, might be at another long-term care center where they do the same thing again through dinner and until bedtime. They get home pretty late at night, spend a few minutes with their own kids, and then start the process again the next day. Start the process again the next day. There's no hope of a future. There's no hope of advancement. It's just a matter of doing this day in and day out. Most of our neighbors are women. Most of them are racialized women. Most of them are newcomers. Many of them are victims of what I call the greatest bait and switch program in the world, which is the Canadian immigration system. When we tell people if you have certain profession, if you have certain qualifications, then you have enough points to come to Canada. But when you come to Canada, we say, oh, but you can't actually work in your profession. But are you interested in working in long-term care or at Tim Hortons? I tell you this not as a sob story that we should feel sorry for these people. But why I'm telling you this is to let you know that this isn't by accident. For better or for worse, through malevolence or more likely through neglect, the system is designed that way. The long-term care system only works if you have low-income people willing to do the hard work. Otherwise, the system can't afford itself. And of course, at the beginning of the pandemic, we blamed folks. We said, how dare you work at 2 long-term care centers when in fact you're spreading disease. But the system is built that way. It's designed that way. The good news is, if we can design a bad system, we can design a good system. And we can figure out how to design that system better. I'm running a little long here, always. So I'll just go over the fourth one real quick. You all know about it. The fourth one is environmental crisis. Certainly, we have to be able to draw a good balance between prosperity and environment. You'll never find and I recognize I'm talking to people who are sometimes based on Vancouver Island, you'll never find a bigger proponent of the Canadian energy sector, of the responsible Canadian energy sector than me. But even the Canadian energy sector is way ahead of many of our politicians because they understand that there is a carbon budget, that we have to figure out how to innovate and move to carbon neutrality without impoverishing people. And so together, those things can work together. And I won't belabor that point just given time, but I want to get to the fifth one. So public health, mental health, economic, environmental, equity. We're coming to a real reckoning finally in our communities on the issue of equity. For me, this has been a hard journey. And in particular, the summer of 2020 was very tough for me. After the murder of George Floyd in May of that year, people around the world came together in grief and in anger and in wanting their voices to be heard. And at the City of Calgary, we did something we'd never done before, which is we invited everyone in the community, and I underline everyone in the community, to just come to City Hall to discuss their issues or their stories on racism in the community. And so we sat there for a few days and listened to these conversations with my city council. And most of council was quite shocked by what they heard. 3 of us were not shocked at all by what we heard. You can probably guess what tied the 3 of us together. In fact, in the 136-year history of the city of Calgary to that point, there had only been 7 visibly non-white members of council elected. 4 of us served on that council. If you're wondering why only 3 of us were shocked and the 4th one wasn't, well, that's kind of a deep dive into Calgary politics. But those of you who follow Calgary politics will know that that 4th one, well, doesn't pay much attention to anything. And he's still there. But in any case, I had to ask myself why I wasn't shocked. Why was it that when I heard a 20-year-old Black man tell a story of what happens to him if he tries to go out on a Saturday night, that was the same story that my friends and I would tell ourselves when we were 20. And sadly, I'm not 20 anymore. And so I thought to myself, okay, how do we reconcile 2 very difficult things in our minds? Number one is, can we be proud of what we built in Canada? And frankly, I've made my whole life, probably 3 decades, extolling the values of Canadian multiculturalism and Canadian pluralism around the world, trying to use this as an example of what is possible. The Aga Khan, just before I was elected in 2010, the Aga Khan gave a lecture in which he said something like, Canada is the most successful example of pluralism in human history. And I believe that.
Mr. Nenshi, just want to
Yes.
let you know you're 15 minutes before end session. Sorry to interrupt.
Perfect. And we'll have about 10 minutes for questions. Thanks, Bettina. So I am very proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that Calgary elects a guy who looks like me. I'm proud of the fact that the current city council has as many non-white people on it as all the city councils before it. But how do I reconcile that with the fact that we've got a long way to go to true anti-racism? Can we have both of those thoughts in our heads? Usually it doesn't flash back like that with my background. How can we have both of those thoughts in our heads at the same time? And so I don't really know the answer. I just know that we've got to get there. And I have a sense of how to get there. And I think there are two things that I want to highlight before we get to questions here in terms of how to get there. The first one is the importance of service. If you've heard me speak in the last 11 years, you know one word in Sanskrit, and that word is seva. Seva means selfless service. And I think that through our service, through bringing more people into community service, we find our common humanity and we find community. So when I first became mayor, I started a program called 3 Things for Calgary. Later, for Canada's sesquicentennial, Canada's 150th anniversary, that's still my favorite word to say, we expanded across the country, three things for Canada. And it's a very simple thing that I encourage you to put in place in your workplaces and in your communities, which is just encouraging each and every person to do at least 3 acts of community service every year. It could be something small, shovel your neighbor's walk. It could be something big, join the board of a nonprofit, mentor a young person through Big Brothers or Big Sisters. It doesn't matter if it's big or small. What matters is that it's service. And I'll let you in on a secret. It's not really about 3 things. It's a little bit of pop psychology. It's about creating a lifetime habit of service. Because Marion Wright Edelman once said, service is the rent we pay for being human. But I believe that in service, we have the opportunity to be able to look at one another's common humanity and to build a better community. The other one, so service is one. Sometimes I talk about empathy, sometimes I talk about caring, but today I want to talk about love. In this world where the voices of anger and division and hatred and mean-spiritedness seem to be growing stronger and louder, it feels like they're going to win. We can't let them win because you see, and here's the one thing I want you to take away from today, if anything. For the first time in the lifetime of anyone who is alive today, we are living in a moment of extraordinary creativity. The pandemic in particular has upended all of our assumptions about how society works. So as a result, we're living in what I call a wet clay moment. A moment where we are able to craft our own future and create a better future. But here's the thing about wet clay. It hardens. And when it hardens, you're stuck with it. You're stuck with that sculpture. So for many people who've been fighting to build a better community, we're exhausted. We don't want to do more. But we have to. And we have to be able to do it now. Because real change doesn't happen through handsome ex-politicians giving lectures. I'm sure that those exist. It happens through every single one of us making it happen. Everyday people, with our everyday hands, our everyday hearts, and especially our everyday voices, in order to make real change. And we're called upon to do that. Because if there's one thing I know, it's that in the long run, the voices of anger and division and mean-spiritedness and hatred can never win. Dr. King reminds us that the long arc of moral history bends towards justice. But no one ever quotes the second part, which is you got to grab the arc and put it towards justice. And right now, there's a lot of people trying to mold that clay. And they want to mold it into a world, make it great again, make it the way it used to be, take it back to normal. But we have the ability to do so much better. And what I know is that in a long history, those voices of anger and mean-spiritedness never win. The voices of kindness, compassion, mercy, empathy, and love always win. So I want to finish this portion before we go to questions. And Jackie, if you could tee up the little book with a little reading. I want to read to you a little instruction manual for life that you can use as we go forward. So, Jackie, if you can pull up the screen, here we go. And we'll just wait for that screen to come on. There we go. All right, this is Love the World by Todd Parr. Love your face. Love your space. Love your nose and love your toes. Love your eyes. Love your size. Love your talk. Love your walk. Love giving a hand. Love taking a stand. Love the bees. Love the trees. Love your ears and love your tears. Love your hair and love your flair. Love being kind. Love using your mind. Love making arts. Love sharing your hearts. Love your giggle and love your wiggle. Love your grin. Love your skin. Love the land. Love the sea. Love the earth. Love you and me. Love yourself. Love the world. Thank you all. Let's go to some questions.
Hello, Mr. Nenshi. Thank you so much for a great presentation. I was just swept up in the story. I almost forgot that it was my turn again to help you. We have a few questions in the chat. Again, anybody else who has any questions, you do have a few more minutes to put them in the chat. So feel free. Specifically, the questions I have received 3 questions, or 3 people have indicated questions. So Megan Reimer says, thank you, Mr. Naheed. My question's for you with a bit of background. My MA thesis was on mental health and its impact on communications. My research found that many people experiencing, or as I put it, braving mental health conditions do so in silence because their loved ones, their health professionals, their colleagues don't believe their experiences and how serious they are. We put the onus on people braving mental health to speak up or ask for help, which requires an incredible amount of courage and bravery. Thank Bell Let's Talk Day, which is often aimed at encouraging those experiencing mental health to speak up, but when we ignore what they are sharing. So, aside from having more access to professional mental health support, what are your thoughts on creating emotional space and safety for our loved ones experiencing mental health conditions?
What an important question. And so part of that, and I encourage people to check out Calgary's strategy. It's called A Community of Connections. And it's available. If you just go to calgary.ca, you'll see it out there. But what's really critical here is that we normalize these conversations around mental health and we create spaces where it's okay to have those conversations. So it's not just about mental health professionals who have a really important role to play, but it's really also about all of us taking the opportunity to be able to help. And sometimes you can do that formally. You can be trained in mental health first aid, which is a pretty easy thing to be able to do. But sometimes you can be like that kid in that elementary school, just letting people know that they've got a friend. And it sounds trite, but this stuff's actually really important. And, I'm a fan of Bell Let's Talk Day, or as it was, because it really started to normalize the conversation around mental health. And when you saw famous and successful people talking about their own struggles with mental health, it actually made a difference. And so, in creating those spaces, it's really important. You also have to be intentional, I think, in different spaces and places to be able to create that. So when we did our mental health strategy, for example, we called together a steering committee of people from different aspects of the community, from education, from healthcare, from the nonprofit sector, from the private sector. And the people who really went running with this thing is are the CEOs, the corporate CEOs that we had there, because they suddenly got really interested in how they create mentally safe workplaces. And it really was around figuring out how you make sure that the workplace is a safe place. And part of that is simply because um, it's good for business, right? And part of it is because you can change your benefits so that mental health is a more obvious thing. But a big part of it is just making sure people know it's okay. And that if you talk about your mental health at work, it's not weak and you can actually, it's not a sign of weakness and you can actually do real work. So, in any case, let us go to the next question because I'm getting the 5 minute warning. Go ahead, Bettina.
Your next question is from Jennifer Rathwell. She says, "What are your best practices for creating community, for spaces and discussions where everyone feels welcome?"
You just do it. I mean, that sounds like a very simple answer. But what you really want to do is you want to encourage behavior that really allows people to feel welcome. And I really believe that, and there's a big debate right now around what's the meaning of secularism, who do we put in into the public square. But I believe that a society is stronger when we welcome everyone in the public square. And so we welcome people who are different to us. We welcome people who might make us uncomfortable.
Mm,
And sometimes I use the word tolerance, and that's kind of a dirty word sometimes because people say, I don't want to be tolerated. I want to be welcomed and appreciated and respected. But sometimes I wonder if tolerance is the higher virtue, that maybe I'll never be entirely comfortable with you. Maybe I'll never invite you to my house for dinner, but I want you to have a decent job. I want you to be able to raise your family without harassment. I want you to be able to participate in society the same way that I can. And those are the kinds of things I think that we need to really be able to build together. So to me, that's really the critical thing is to actually create that space very deliberately by design to ensure that we are creating that space for everyone. All right, let's go to our last question then, or maybe
Our
our last
last,
question.
well, we have a few more questions, but we don't have time, unfortunately, for all of them. So a couple of them are related to leadership. So Mel Cassidy, and maybe this is a quick one for you.
It's never
Question
a quick
is,
one for me, just so you
when will
know.
you be moving into larger scale political leadership?
There is no larger scale
Provincial, federal?
there is no
We
larger
need more
scale political
voices.
leadership. Cities are where it is, man. Cities are where it happens. And I've been so lucky that I have had the ability to have as my first political job the most important political job, which is to be the mayor of a city. So I really wouldn't want a big demotion. That said, in reality, I wear purple every day. And the reason I wear purple every day is not because it brings out the color of my eyes. Well, it's not just because it brings out the color of my eyes, but it is actually because it's red and blue, right? So it's trying to tell people that we are not just our tribes, that we are bound together by our common humanity. And I'm sorry to say there's not much room for purple in partisan politics these days. But I will continue to work as I do outside of the political system to really be able to fight hard to ensure that there is that space for dialogue. And I don't think being a centrist is about not picking a side. It's actually, I call it the muscular center. So it really is about how we can craft something that speaks to our common humanity together.
I think that's a great way to close, Mr.
Well,
Nenshi.
actually,
Thank
I
you.
have one more thing if we're going to close, if you
Oh,
don't mind, Bettina. I just want
please.
to share
No,
with
go
you one
ahead.
last thing,
Sure.
which
You
is
have time.
I had talked a little bit about the work of Dr. Martin Luther King, and this is, of course, Black History Month in February. So I've been thinking a lot about Dr. King. And I'd like to leave you all with one more quote from Dr. King. I've changed it a little bit. Sorry, Dr. King, but I think it's important for the work that we're thinking about now because I know that people are tired. I know that it is challenging to think that there's such a fight ahead of us, and that fight is now. So I just want to leave you with the words of Dr. King. He says, "Now let us begin. Now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world. This is the calling of the children of God, and our brothers and sisters wait eagerly for our response. Shall we say the odds are too great? Shall we tell them the struggle was too hard? Obviously, we cannot, and we will not. And we have this opportunity right now to create that better world. And if there's one thing I know for sure, I know we will. Thank you all.